Well, hello to everyone joining us today. I'd like to welcome you to the RTO Online Cafe, a place where we can explore ideas and approaches related to your RTO business. Today, we're going to focus on questions that arose from the webinar that we hosted a few days ago called Get Smart and Get Compliant Too, looking at how to keep on track and competitive with continuous improvement. If you missed that webinar, there's a recording available on our website. If you go to the learningcommunity.com.au, you'll find it under the webinars tab. It will be there for a short time only for free, and after that it will become part of a series on compliance that will be packaged up and you can buy from our website, which will become a great resource training tool for your RTO. Let me just show you where you can find that recording on our website. So here's our website here. You can see the home tab we're at. If you go to the webinars tab up here, you'll see this. Here's a list of the next webinar, which is actually the one that we're running right now. When this webinar is over, that will go into the archive section, and you've got all the coming soon ones here. If you hit the register, that's how you register. But if you click on the archive tab here, you'll get a list of some of the webinars that we've run in the past. So here's RTO Get Smart and Get Compliant Too, the webinar that we ran just a few days ago. If you click on this View tab, you'll come to this page. Here you can view the slides. You click that, the slides will pop up and you can save them. And obviously you press the play button and you can watch the webinar. So pretty straightforward. You go to Webinars, Archive, and you get a list. Let me tell you a little bit about today's presenters. Karen, Sel and Gillian Hurd have worked in the vet sector for over 13 years, and they are very well experienced and positioned to help you with your RTO. They've worked as trainers and assessors and consultants, helping RTOs right across Australia with a wide range of compliance and business issues. So I'm going to hand it over to Karen now, who will introduce the first question that has arisen from the webinar on compliance that we ran the other day. So I'll hand it over to Karen.
Hi everybody. The first question that we're going to look at today is, how do I know that my continuous improvement cycle is proactive and systematic? In our last RTO Cafe, we talked about the enormous task of successfully juggling the range of activities required to remain compliant. And that first diagram there with the plan, delegate, document as you go can also be used to consider what our indicators are of a proactive and systematic approach to continuous improvement. So first of all, do you actually have a documented plan that addresses all the functions of the RTO with activities scheduled at times that fit with the workflow of your RTO? So this is the plan for compliance. Do you have that documented and written down that actually organises how you're going to approach continuous improvement across the year? And ideally, you would be maximising the workflow of your RTO. When is the quieter times across the year? And you'd be planning those major compliance tasks during that time. Another indicator, another way of knowing whether your system is proactive and systematic, is that staff have clearly delegated responsibilities for various compliance activities. And this could be documented in a range of places, on the continuous improvement plan itself, but also in position descriptions for each of those individual staff members. So there's delegation that's occurring, and that delegation is documented in the plan and in position descriptions. And you would also expect to see other types of documentation, like the management meeting agendas should have regular compliance items on them, and there should be significant involvement from senior management as well as other staff across the RTO. So even though some of these activities are delegated, there is obvious signs of significant engagement across all staff across the RTO. And then finally, another good indicator is what type of documentation you have. And so you should have clear and up-to-date records of your system in practice. There should be regular evidence of monitoring, and that should be documented. Another way of looking at it is that you'll have a continual flow of compliance-related activities happening all throughout the RTO. So that second diagram there, the Plan, Do, Check, Act, is just a reminder that this should be a cyclic process, that there should be activities happening along the way all the time. So what you would be observing in your RTO is that on a regular basis you have a plan that you review and that you document what your approach is going to be across all the key result areas of your RTO. And then you should be seeing some regular compliance activities happening as you implement that plan. And then the other types of evidence would be the checking process, that what type of evidence have you got that shows that you're regularly monitoring your plans along the way, and what improvements can you identify that have resulted from the implementation of this plan. So basically you've got indicators of planning, of activity and of documentation, and that demonstrates that you've got a proactive and systematic approach to continuous improvement happening. Gillian, did you want to make any further comments on that question before we move to the next one?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, talk about the importance of staff being involved in this process. That you know, that what you've outlined is really important in terms of, you know, your indicators about what's happening. But to make sure that this actually is a success, you need to communicate with your staff on a regular basis about what you're doing here. So, yeah, if you don't actually have your staff on board, it's going to be really difficult to make this work, because they won't actually understand why the system is in place, and they won't actually participate or assist you in that.
Yeah, great. Okay, let's look at the next question. And this is around staffing. And the question is, how often should I do a performance review? So the first thing to consider is which staff should be included in a performance review process. So who are we talking about when we ask this question, how often should I do a performance review? And in my opinion, it's all your staff, whether they're casual, whether they're part-time, full-time, or contractors. All of them should be included in a performance review process. You know, as we've been talking about in this series, the approach to compliance is about being good for business, and you know, your staff really are one of your most valuable assets in your business and can make the biggest impact on its success. So I believe it's really worth investing some time in ensuring that staff are very clear about what your expectations of them are, and that you're monitoring their performance and providing feedback and support to all of your staff, particularly your frontline ones who are having the biggest impact on your customers. So an effective performance appraisal system should occur at least annually, but ideally it would be more frequent than that. And just linking it back to the requirements of the award that I mentioned in the webinar a couple of days ago, the Educational Services Award gives some guidelines for how staff should progress through the salary bands that are in the award, and basically states that they should progress through the salary bands each year, subject to continuing satisfactory conduct and performance. So this implies that there is a regular process of performance appraisal, performance review that is happening. One of the outcomes of that is a possible progression through the salary scales, but obviously there's other outcomes of a good performance review, which is things like clear expectations of staff, perhaps planning for professional development, and things like that. So in essence, in answer to the question, that performance reviews should be completed at least annually. And in one of our future webinars, we'll be covering performance appraisal in more detail. And if you're interested in it right now, we also have a guide available on our website that you can purchase that covers the principles and implementation of the performance review. But I just wanted to say in essence that an effective performance review process really is about providing a way to identify work priorities for each of your staff members that's linked with the bigger picture strategic plans of your organisation. It should also assist staff to identify and access development opportunities, and it should help staff align their own individual and career plans and goals with the strategic directions of the RTO. It also should be an opportunity for constructive feedback and also recognition and support along the way. And it should also allow you to identify progress towards achievement of goals, which allows you to look at whether you need to reallocate resources or shift your priorities or support that staff member to actually achieve their goals. So long answer to a quick question, but basically it should be something that's done regularly, and it should be done in a way that supports the individual performance of staff, but also the achievement of the bigger goals for the organisation. Again, Gillian, do you want to reflect on that, or shall we move on to your?
No, I'd really like to have a bit of a chat about this. Look, so many RTOs that we go into have nothing in place like this, and it's just so important for them, as you said, that, you know, if they want to build their business and you know, maintain their competitive edge. They really do need to think about their future, that they have some really clear strategic goals and business plans, and then this performance review hangs off that, because then everybody in the organisation, they need to know what's expected of them. They need to know where the organisation's going, and they need to know how they're contributing to that as well, and how important they are in that process. So this is a lot of people are really scared of doing performance appraisal because they think that it has negative connotations, but this is a really positive way to support your team and grow your business. So, I just wish that more RTOs actually thought about this more clearly. And sometimes you see a little bit of review of the training and assessing staff, so there might be some observations of trainers in the classroom, but then if they don't have that in the context of this sort of review system, they don't know what to do with that information. So they go in and they observe a trainer on the job, and they might have a checklist, and okay, well I've done that, but then what do you do with that? Some might give feedback, but there's nothing then to look at. Well, how do I then monitor improvements, or how do I address the gaps, and in what context do I do that? So I think this is a really important system, and it's not that complex. It's once you get your head around the principles, it's just one of those common sense type things, isn't it?
Yeah, and when those types of things happen, like you're just talking about the review, the monitoring of training, if there's no outcomes that come out of that, then it just fuels that belief that performance appraisal doesn't add any value. If nothing really changes, nothing happens, it just reinforces that. And again, if it's not linked to the bigger goals of the organisation, it doesn't necessarily achieve anything other than providing a bit of feedback for a trainer. It doesn't necessarily improve their capacity to meet their goals. It doesn't ensure that what they're actually focusing on is about the things that the RTO is prioritising. So it really does need to be part of this system. That's a cascading system from the whole organisation down to the individual.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. I think that I've seen it actually turn into a lack of trust type thing. Why are they in my classroom? And traditionally education, training, teaching in schools and vet sector and university as well has been a very individual and private things. Yeah, so if you're going to open the doors and let everybody in and to actually watch what you're doing, you do need to feel comfortable with that. And if it's not framed in this kind of framework, then it can seem obtrusive. And, I have seen people say, well, they don't trust me. How dare they say that to me? So, it's really important. All right. Well, I might take over now to talk about the next question. And this is a question that we deal with on a very regular basis, and that is how do you conduct an effective validation exercise? And in a way, this is really closely related to that whole issue of privacy of practice training and assessment. And there are a lot of trainer assessors in RTOs who object to their assessment practices actually coming under scrutiny. But it is a requirement of the standards that every RTO actually systematically reviews and validates their assessment practices. But of course, it must be much more than just that requirement. Validation is actually a really important part of your everyday training assessment practice, and it's actually really helpful for the RTO, but it's also very helpful for the trainer and at the end of the day for the student as well. But how do you do it? We see so many RTOs that really struggle with this because they don't have clear processes in place. They really struggle to actually get staff engaged. They will schedule validation exercises and trainers don't turn up. So how do you actually go about making it work for you in your RTO? And the other day during the webinar, we touched on this a little bit in terms of looking at the quiet times at the points throughout the year where you might finish the delivery of a course, or you might actually finish the delivery of a particular unit of competency. And so, different times where perhaps when you have staff meetings scheduled, that you could actually draw staff in and actually get them involved in this sort of process. But before you do that, you really should give some thought to the policies that you have in place around training and assessment, and you should make sure that you have very clear policy documents that outline the importance of validation and the process that, the overarching process that you will follow and the frequency of validation that will actually happen in your RTO. That policy should then also align closely with your learning and assessment strategies for the various courses that you deliver, so that they do align and they all say the same thing and make sense. And then you should also have very clearly outlined in your position descriptions for your trainers and your training management staff the requirement that they actually participate in the validation processes, and that they are required to attend meetings and conduct validation. So then all of those sort of policy and process documents are in place, then it's much easier to actually get your validation systems up and running. And that's, we have on our website, you can actually look at the policy packs that we have around training assessment, and some of the forms and things that you actually can use and checklists that you can use to actually support this process. So if we look at the diagram here, I've just outlined, you need those overarching policies, but you need clear processes on the ground as well. So you need clear instructions for the validation team about what they're actually going to do in those validation sessions. You need checklists to guide the validation exercise. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what validation actually entails in a minute. But you need documents so that everybody knows what they're doing, and also so that you can document the outcomes. So when you're validating your assessments, if you actually find that there's improvements required, that you can actually document that, and there's a process to show who that information needs to be delivered to, who's responsible to fill the gaps, and then how do you actually report that up to management to document that it's happened. So you may need a validation report template too for the exercise. As mentioned before, you need to think about engagement of staff, so you need to have it in their role descriptions, but there should be clear communication about expectations, and you should try as much as you can to accommodate the needs of your staff, particularly if they're only in your organisation, maybe one day a week to train. Make sure you invite them along to an event that doesn't actually interfere with another day of where they might be working somewhere else. You might actually try and have the event in the holidays or on a Saturday or the evening, provide dinner, and make it a real team building exercise, something that they will really value because they're actually coming together. And this then becomes an opportunity for development of skills, sharing knowledge, and I've found that it actually enables them to come up with problems that they've been worried about but haven't known what to do with. So some issues that they might have with particular assessments or whatever, under this kind of situation, they're more willing to come out and talk about these things, and if they find that other people in their team share their concerns, it's really helpful for them, and then they can work as a team to actually rectify the problems. I'll just ask Karen now, have you had those sort of experiences with working with teams around validation?
Yeah, I was just actually going to reflect on the point around who do you involve, and do you bring only the trainers in, or do you involve external people in the validation process? Because we often find that can be a really valuable thing to do, to bring some external people in that aren't directly involved in the delivery of the training, because sometimes people get very attached to the way that they deliver something and don't have that objective perspective of how well is this actually working, and how closely aligned to the training package requirements is it, and so they don't see it. But having an external perspective sometimes can bring a lot of value to those validation discussions. And yeah, I've just found that can be a really valuable thing to do. It depends on the culture of the RTO as well. I think that sometimes the attitude about being involved in validation is that, well, that's not really part of my job. and I work for a number of RTOs, so really that's not something that I need to be involved in. But where it works best is when people really do engage in that process and see it as a process of improving what they're doing, improving the quality of the delivery and assessment, and keeping in mind that the whole reason for it is the quality outcomes ultimately for the student. So when we see that happening, that's where the validation exercise actually adds a lot of value, I think, to the practices of the RTO.
Yeah, I've certainly seen that. I've been into RTOs where the manager has handed out a validation checklist to their staff to say, go away and validate your assessments, and every time they do that, they come back with the checklist that says everything's perfect. There's nothing wrong. So I find that
absolutely.
So starting off with a bit of a almost like a training or refresher course in assessment and assessment validation is really helpful to open up people's eyes, because trainers are different. Sometimes you find within any RTO, different trainers will be at different levels of understanding and practice in terms of assessment. So it's actually really good to go back and reflect on the assessment principles and the requirements of the training package, and then ask them to bring along samples of assessments that they're working on and look at them. They tend to then look at them with fresh eyes, but okay, well, right, I've been saying this is okay, but actually doesn't really meet the validity principle or something like that. So
and I think the other thing that needs to be thought about too is how much permission do people feel that they have to be able to critique something and identify something that's not as good as it could be. Because if the culture of the organisation is, well, you don't criticise and you don't identify errors, then this is a very difficult exercise to get right. But if there's openness and transparency and awareness of the continual improvement process that's required in any form of training and assessment, regardless who's developed it, then there's more. I think there's more chance of it being a positive exercise.
Yeah, there is a train of thought that says you actually should open up your validation exercises outside your RTO as well. So it is actually really recommended that you might band together with another RTO that's in your field, to sit down and discuss your assessments together. Now, there can be some issues around competitiveness there and confidentiality, and there are some people who don't want to share their assessment resources with another RTO because I guess there's that lack of trust. But I still think that in some industries it's actually really possible to do that. And I think you've been involved in a largish organisation where they do get panels together. Can you tell us how that works?
Yeah, there's lots of ways it works. Sometimes they bring consultants in just to do a validation exercise on their own or as part of a validation team, but they also have industry teams of people that sit on committees that represent, some of them represent other RTOs, some of them represent consulting organisations, and some of them are industry experts, and they participate in the validation exercise as well. And so you get a very broad perspective on it, and some of it is really helpful in thinking about how do we actually make this more applicable to the industry and the assessments real life for what the student will actually be required to be doing when they get out there and apply their skills in the workplace. So it works really well.
Okay, we might move on to the next one then, because we're going to talk a little bit more detail about what validation and moderation really is all about. And I guess this is the $60 million question from some of the discussions that Karen and I have had in RTOs, that what's the difference between moderation and validation. If I start off with validation first, it's actually validation is defined as a quality review process. And it actually involves checking the process that's actually followed in the RTO, the actual tools, and the evidence that's submitted or the evidence that's actually gathered from students. So if we start off talking about the process, it's very easy to just put assessment processes in place and then just keep on doing them forever and never actually think about it in terms of, you know, how frequently you assess a student, you know, when does it occur during the course, how is it administered, who's actually involved, those kind of things. So it's a really helpful thing to to look at the assessment process when you're validating, and it's really good for updating RTO practices and policies, and also to make sure that, you know, the student's being assessed at the right time when they actually have developed the right amount of skills and knowledge, and, you know, they're ready for it. You know, processes like preparing students for the assessment also should be looked at. So, you know, are they, you know, the assessment's done in surprise, or is the student well aware? Are the students ready for the assessment? Those kind of things. But it's really also important to look at the process against the assessment principles too. And of course, the assessment principles and rules of evidence around validity and reliability, sufficiency, currency, and authenticity. So those principles and rules should be looked at during the validation process. And we also validate the assessment tools against those principles, and we validate the tools against the actual benchmark or the units of competency, the training package requirements or the accredited course requirements, to make sure that the tools we have in place to gather the evidence actually do meet the requirements. So are we assessing what we should be assessing? You know, have we put practices in place to make sure that our processes and our tools are reliable? We're gathering enough evidence. Is it authentic? Are we, you know, we're making sure that our students are really doing the assessment work themselves, and are the assessments the evidence we're actually gathering demonstrate currency of skills and knowledge. So all of those things should be looked at, and I mentioned before that you should be using a checklist to go through this. The other things that you might be looking for in validation is, you know, are the tools written in plain English? Do they really reflect the language of the unit of competency that's being assessed? Are they easy to use? Are there instructions that are clear for the student? Are there instructions clear for the assessor? So all of those things should be looked at. Then, of course, you should also be looking at the evidence gathered and making sure that it does actually meet the requirements of the tool and the principles and the benchmark. Validation is a little different in that it's a process of bringing assessment judgments and standards into alignment, and it's definitely very much related to that reliability principle. And it's a process that ensures that the same standards are applied to all assessment results within the same units of competency, and it's an active process in the sense that adjustments to assessor judgments are made to overcome differences in the difficulty of the tool perhaps, or in the severity of the judgment made. So what does that actually mean? Well, you know, you might have different assessors, trainers assessors marking different pieces of work across an RTO. How do you know that those assessors are actually consistent in their approach? How do you know that your tools are actually reliable, so that if different assessors are using the same tools, they're going to come up with similar outcomes for students in your RTO? So in all reality, you know, to be consistent and to really moderate everything properly, you should be actually moderating every piece of assessment and adjusting the outcome if needed. But that's unlikely to happen, isn't it? Because RTOs are busy places and there's all sorts of assessment happening all over the place, so it's very unlikely to happen. Where I've seen that happen really effectively is in where large assessment projects are actually being assessed, and so you might assign 2 assessments, and then you might have a moderation of the approach to those assessments. Perhaps during final projects or final presentations, you might have different assessors working, you know, actually looking at the project or the presentation delivered, and then a session to sit down and actually moderate that later on. But what most people are likely to do is take a really proactive approach with careful monitoring check-ins throughout the year, where you actually sit your team down and compare their approach to assessment and look at where there are differences and how they could be improved. And one really good way to do this is to provide a piece of work that, or several pieces of work that the students have actually submitted, de-identify that work so you don't know who the student is, and ask a number of assessors to actually mark that piece of work, and then come together around the table and look at how they've actually marked that work, you know, whether answers have been marked correct, or whether, you know, extra information is required, or whether they're incorrect, whatever, and use the model answers that you have already prepared in your RTO, of course, against the benchmark, the unit of competency, and look at whether there's any deficiencies in that model answer, explore the interpretation of those model answers, ensure the interpretation of your individual trainers and assessors, you know, against the actual unit of competency as well, so that you can identify where there's some gaps, where you might want to improve the actual assessment tools themselves or improve the model answers. If you do this on a regular basis and keep a check-in on what your trainers are, how your trainers are actually approaching the assessment process, then that actually can help you to moderate and to really minimise the amount of difference between you know, the assessment that's happening in your RTO. Do you want to make a comment on any of that, Karen?
Yeah, I guess just to reinforce the difference between the two, that validation is that quality process to make sure that all of your systems and tools and the evidence that you're gathering is compliant with what you're supposed to be gathering, and that you're assessing what you're supposed to be assessing, whereas moderation is about that alignment of judgments that individual assessors are making, so that regardless of who marks it, you should be getting the same outcome. So as long as you've got a set of tools, assessment tools that you're using that meet all the requirements and are well written, and the process is clear and if it's implemented properly, then moderation helps to ensure that regardless of who the trainer or assessor is, you should be getting the same outcomes for any particular piece of evidence that a student might submit. Yeah, and those model answers are really critical in bringing about, I guess, a common understanding between the assessors of what they're actually looking for. Sometimes there's qualitative sort of judgments that are being made, and those model answers are a really helpful guide to make sure that you're marking this in a similar way, and to the AQF level, the expectation of what a student should be submitting, because sometimes a student might submit appropriate responses for the level of the course, but a different student might go way beyond what's required, and it's not about comparing a student to another student, but about comparing the work the student does to the requirement of the piece of assessment. So,
I've also found that a lot of RTOs actually don't conduct these moderation sessions. It's getting a little bit off this actual question now, but one of the benefits, I think, for actually holding this moderation session, a moderation session as well as a validation, or it can be part of the same session, is to really draw attention to the fact that those model answers exist. I've seen model answers in place in an RTO, but when I say in place, firmly on a shelf where nobody actually has seen them. And so, as you talked about the qualitative judgments that are made, trainers and assessors who are very familiar with their industry and their topic that they're teaching tend to mark on gut feel and make those qualitative judgments, and unfortunately when you do that, you are actually exposing yourself to error of judgment, in terms of your attitude to the topic or your attitude to the student, or there's a whole range of errors that you actually, traps that you can fall into there. So actually bringing the model answers out into a moderation session forces everybody in the RTO to go, oh, okay, there are answers to this, and we should be looking at these answers, and oh gee, these answers actually aren't very good, and we need to improve them. And that's another point, that you may purchase assessments and customize them for your use, and they should come with those model answers, but those model answers are not the be-all and end-all. They're not the end of the story. They are just the starting point, and through your discussions in your RTO, you should continue to improve those model answers throughout these kind of sessions, so that they really do reflect really helpful answers to the questions that are being asked or the situations that the students are addressing.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that moderation does is helps a trainer to be clear about what level of expectation to have of the student's answer,
Yes.
because it's very, very likely and probably essential that the trainers know a whole lot more than the students do about the particular topic, and it's easy as an assessor to expect the student to deliver an answer to the level of your understanding as an assessor, where really that's in most cases not required.
It's also in some areas really important because you mentioned the AQF before. It's really interesting. If you're perhaps you might be a trainer that's highly trained in an area, say like the law. You might be a lawyer, but you're delivering a course in legal administration, and so your expectations of your students may be way above where they should be for the AQF. So having those model answers actually really draws the trainer to the place where they should be as well. And I have seen that happen at times. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that we've finished with the questions that we had before. Over to you, Darren.
Thanks, Karen and Gillian. There's lots of great helpful content there. Thanks for that. If you've got any other questions that you would like to ask related to compliance or anything really related to your registered training organisation, please send us an email at info@thelearningcommunity.com.au. That's info@thelearningcommunity.com.au. And we'll either do one of three things. We'll write a blog post about it, and you can find that on our website, thelearningcommunity.com.au/blog. We might write an email about it, so make sure you're on our email list. If you go to our website front page, there's a nice big circle there which you can sign up onto our email list. And thirdly, we possibly might answer the question in an upcoming webinar. So again, make sure that you're on our email list so you know when the next webinars are coming up. And they're also on our website under the webinar tab. So we may write a blog post about it, an email about it, or answer it in an upcoming webinar or an RTO cafe. Or we might do all of them. So send emails to us and we'll do our best to answer those questions as best as we can. Don't miss out on our next events. February 26th, how to use an audit to improve policy, procedure, and assessment practice. And this is the third and final installment of the RTO compliance webinar series. Then on March 12, we've got the next webinar coming up, Get Smart with Great Staff, and that's the first of a series of webinars focused on staffing issues. And this one in particular is focusing on attract and recruit the staff you need. So go to our website and you can sign up for that one as well. And then on March 14, just 2 days after that, we've got the next RTO online cafe Q&A, which we can look at some questions that have arisen from either of those webinars or any question that you might want to send in to us. Also, don't forget to check out and grab some of our very helpful and very well priced products. We've got staffing guides, RTO policy and procedures manuals, lots of things for compliance, individual policy packs, continuous improvement, scheduling documents, plus a whole lot more. So if you go to our website, hit the products tab, then you'll see the categories there. And we've priced them very, very cheaply. You won't find these products cheaper anywhere else. And if you do, just let us know and we'll match that price or even do better. So go to our website and hit the products tab and you'll find out all the products that are there. We've also got a range of services that you might like to avail yourself of, consultancy services and also a range of audit services. We've arranged them as pizza toppings to be a little bit funny, but also just an easy way to remember or to categorize what we've got on offer. Or you can create your own topping. So they begin with the margarita, which is a 2-hour checkup. You get to meet with key staff to analyse your governance system and identify opportunities for improvement. It also includes a written report, and the meetings can be conducted in person if you're in the Sydney region or via Skype if you're not in the Sydney region. That's $396, very well priced for all the things that you get there. Right up to the Super Supreme, which is a comprehensive audit for more than 10 qualifications, a 2-day audit, a comprehensive review of compliance against the NVR or AQTF standards. You also receive a sampling of evidence and a thorough report with rectification suggestions. It also includes a feedback meeting and a written report. If you have any questions about any of our services, or you want to create your own topping, that's fine. Just give us a call or email us on info@thelearningcommunity.com.au, and we can begin the conversation of what might suit your situation best. Well, thank you for being with us today. It's been very helpful, and we hope to see you at one of our events in the near future. Thanks for being with us today. See you later.